Another example of judicial overreach. Using his full and proper legal authority, President Trump imposed universal tariffs and reciprocal tariffs on Liberation Day to address the extraordinary threat to our national security and economy posed by large and persistent annual U.S. goods trade deficits. The United States has run a trade deficit of goods every year since 1975. In 2024, our trade deficit in goods exceeded $1 trillion. Everybody agrees this is unacceptable. President Trump is delivering on his promise to fix this problem, and he has taken a long overdue and much needed bold stance for American workers after decades of our manufacturing base being hollowed out. The president's rationale for imposing these powerful tariffs was legally sound and grounded in common sense. President Trump correctly believes that America cannot function safely long-term if we are unable to scale advanced domestic manufacturing capacity, have our own secure critical supply chains, and our defense industrial base is dependent on foreign adversaries. Three judges of the U.S. Court of International Trade disagreed and brazenly abused their judicial power to usurp the authority of President Trump to stop him from carrying out the mandate that the American people gave him. These judges failed to acknowledge that the President of the United States has core foreign affairs powers and authority given to him by Congress to protect the United States economy and national security. Congress had created the National Emergency Act to provide the congressional framework to strike down improper IEEPA use. And any questions over whether President Trump improperly imposed these IEEPA tariffs were already adjudicated in Congress following again, these lower district court judges ruling against this administration in the president's basic executive authority and powers. And this administration is fighting every single one of those battles in court, including already the block that came down from the tariff court, the IEEPA court last night. And as on my way out here to the briefing room, I understand that there was another district court judge right here in Washington, D.C., who ruled against the president's tariff power. And I will get to the heart of your question, and I'm glad that we are addressing this in the room today, because nationwide injunctions ordered against the first Trump administration, Trump 1.0, account for more than half of the injunctions issued in this country since 1963. And President Trump had more injunctions in one full month of office in February than Joe Biden had in 3 years. And let me roll through some of these radical injunctions to paint the picture for the American people at home. These are not just talking points. These are real judges in the court of law who are trying to block the president's power and the policies that he was elected to enact. For example, a court ordered the Trump administration to return already deported terrorist aliens back to the United States. A court has ruled the Trump administration can't even temporarily pause our refugee programs. Courts prohibited the Trump administration from eliminating federal funding for child transgender surgery and mutilation, a practice that the American people overwhelmingly reject. A court also held that the Trump administration could not ban people experiencing gender dysphoria or mental health issues from serving in the military. Ridiculous. Courts prohibited the removal of transgender women from women's prisons despite potential physical harm to real women in those prisons, biological women. A Northern District of California judge issued an absurd ruling that the president cannot fire people within the executive branch without Congress passing a bill, even though Congress has expressly authorized the president through the Office of Personnel Management to authorize reductions in force across agencies. A court also ordered the Trump administration to rehire thousands.
All right. Hello, everybody. It is 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in East Tennessee on this May 29th. So, do this video. I was away over the weekend and so forth, but with everything going on, I had to put one out. So, that was Caroline Leavitt, and what a great job she's doing, I have to say. Believe she was a candidate for New Hampshire 1. I can't remember if it's 1 or 2 in 2022. She won the primary, but lost the general. But she's absolutely fantastic, passionate, to the point, and let's go. So we get this injunction from the trade court. 3 judges unanimously say you can't do this. Now, what's fantastic about it is, okay, Congress creates, I believe it's 1701, 1702, okay, the Emergency Economics Act, okay, which allows the president to declare the emergency in this certain area. Then he can impose the tariffs, among other powers granted to him, from investigation powers all the way through all sorts of different powers are listed in that legislation. Okay? So what these judges have done is they have decided on the merits of the emergency. That is a power that is not granted to the lower court once passed. I mean, the United States has no problem. Emergency here, federal funding. Natural disaster, emergency here, sanctions against this country. No court ever steps in. But here in this instance, they did. So they are ruling on the merits of whether it's emergency or not. That is not their power. Okay? That is not their power to do so. Okay? And you can argue back and forth on the merits whether it's emergency or not. 100,000 dead people from fentanyl a year in the United States. Many people would consider that an emergency, and that was part of this ruling. I would consider it an emergency, especially since it's smuggling across, and we can use leverage with tariffs to fix that. Okay? Trade deficits. Entering a multipolarity world where we just went through COVID, had supply chain issues and everything to that effect, not to mention the $1 trillion trade deficits, which Caroline Levitt clearly was specifying the specifics of our trade imbalances with all these nations. Yes, there is an economic emergency because should something happen, something happens between us and China. We don't have the supplies of what we need to get through daily life in the United States right now. So absolutely is. But it's irrelevant what the merits are because it is not the court's decision. Did the Trump administration follow the statute? Absolutely. They used the Economic Emergencies Act and they imposed the tariffs. And how do we know? Because within hours of this ruling, the appeal court immediately overturned them. And this is a pattern, right? All these judges, and then she goes on to other judges. Like the one thing in the last video, she said, can't fire the executive. Imagine a CEO not being able to fire somebody in his company. Well, that's what this one judge. And the majority of them are from Massachusetts. They're from Washington, D.C. They are not this is not judicial review. Is that legislation constitutional? Did someone overstep their bounds? Did someone take unilateral action that was not given them? Now, you want to make the argument that Congress should not have yielded that power to the president. That's different. But it's done. Then bring the legislation up for a debate and a vote to repeal it. He's following the laws. And the patience of the Trump administration with all these judges doing what they're doing is astounding to me. Okay? Because I'm saying they're already losing. It's the lower courts. They're losing their credibility. And there comes a point where it's like you just don't have authority anymore. Okay? Any governing entity has to have the consent of the people. When you lose credibility to a certain point, it's like, all right, enough. I'm not listening to you anymore. And you lose that. But the Trump administration has been, and like I said, within hours, reverses that. Before I open this video, Breitbart has it. It was just so funny. Let me pull it up on the... here we go. Here's the headline. Tariffs off. Slash through it on. Appeals court backs Trump. White House torches rogue judges. Of course. So, I mean, what a waste of time. What a waste of time and the destruction of their credibility. Okay, I believe it's time that Congress takes back some of this power from these lower courts. The appeals court, whatever, and there have been decisions that I disagreed with, but at least they were based in some sort of law, some of these decisions. This is just out of control. Okay, and it shows you how quickly, like these people, the appellate court knew they were going to overturn this because they were making policy decisions upon the legality of this action. That is not the court's job, period. So I want to touch on that and comment also again how Caroline Levitt handled that well. And Trump tariffs back on because of the correct courts. Now, there's a huge move. Ignore, and I get that, and it's coming. It's coming close because when there's such an, you see, it's co-equal. When one is encroaching on the other, particularly even the lower courts, to a point where the elected president, only person in the executive branch that's accountable to the people, his power is now pushed, and instead of 33%, 33%, we're coming up on 40, 45, 50, and the executive shrunk. You say, yes, you got to ignore these judges because it's blatantly, and you got to remember, they took an oath. No, they didn't. The majority of these leftist judges believe in their left-wing ideology before anything else. Remember, the Constitution is a document that preserves religious rights, religious freedoms, free speech rights, all these things, and limits the power of the federal government and recognizes the powers of the state, the family, the individual, etc. So ideologically, these people don't believe in it. When they put their hand on whatever they put their hand on these days, particularly in these liberal areas, to take that oath to defend the Constitution, they're breaking it the minute they do it because they don't believe in it because their ideology is against what the Constitution believes in. It's like what Jesse Kelly says. He's great. I may be a judge, but I'm a communist first. I may be a teacher, but I'm a communist first. It's that mentality. And he's right. Okay? So you have to remember it. But the point is that if we get to that point, what I'm afraid of is if we'll trigger John Roberts saying if you ignore that. We're going to break most of these, like the appellate court did today, break a lot of these decisions our way. So be patient, go through it. And good thing the Trump administration can chew gum and walk at the same time because they're doing it. And CNBC put out a huge article saying even if they didn't get this ruling, there are other avenues to go. There are lots of legal statutory avenues in all types of, whether it's the immigration front, the spending front, the DOGE front, the tariff front, that you can take based upon statutory law. So while you argue up the courts to get that, you can go other avenues and other justifications. This is what's amazing about the Trump administration. You have people now with the Tapper book and everything that were in the Biden administration say, oh yeah, we finagled democracy because we just wanted to stop Trump. Machiavellian. We don't want Trump, so we're going to just throw out the Constitution and the law to do what we can. That's their mentality. The Trump administration is following statutes, constitutions. They're even obeying these stupid judges. So who's the tyrant? Who's the dictator? It's the left in the United States, particularly the Democratic Party, which is the communists, leftists, globalists, whatever you want to call them, wrapped in, with, these tyrannical beliefs that don't like the Constitution. They'll just throw it out. So let's keep going. We're winning a lot of fronts and everything like that. So I wanted to share that with you, my opinion on it. So let's just keep, chew gum, walk, how about run, even better, and continue barreling forward because we're going to win on these fronts. All right, so that just annoyed me. And then it's like literally hours later. Like, what a waste of time. You knew you were going to be overturned. Just to slow it down, get the headlines, obstruct, even though you have no legal basis in law because you're stepping out of your lane. It's not up to you, the lower court, to decide what's an emergency and what's not. It's up to you to decide, did the Trump administration follow the law? And they did. All right. Next one. So, this is Scott Pressler, a warning to Republicans. I'm on the ground every single day talking to voters. If Republicans don't get their act together to codify President Trump's agenda, DOGE, no tax on Social Security, you will lose the midterm elections. I say this peacefully and professionally. I agree with him. Now, I have massive issues with the big, beautiful bill. We'll call it Triple B, BBB, Too much spending, too much deficits. A lot of the cuts are at the tail end. Now, a lot of the spending that are like border priorities are in the front end, so that kind of goes away as well. after a few years once you get the mission accomplished, okay? But, and we now know, Russ Vought just said as well today, that a lot of these Doge cuts are coming in Monday, and they're going to be in rescission packages and more than one. And I like that, especially with our narrow majority, with these rhinos from like New York and California, like Lawler and others, that if you do it in little packages, we could tweak it, whatever, we can try to get most of it through. Okay, so I'm a big fan of how to do that. I reluctantly support this bill. And why? Because one, it's campaign promises. Two, because of the inflation and everything, if average Americans, the way they've been hit with food prices, energy prices, insurance prices, etc., and they're been gapping it on credit cards for the last 4 years, if the taxes were to revert pre-2017, back to the Obama years, this would be like the straw that breaks the camel back. And we cannot do that. And there are other provisions in here. So codifying that is important. And he ran on this. Republicans won because of the coattails of Trump. Get this done. And while I agree with Massey and others on the spending, we can do that later. Whether it's a future debt ceiling fight, whether it's bill after bill after bill of like rescission packages and things like that to get that moving. I also think we spend too much on defense. NDAA. It does not need to be $1 trillion. We focus Monroe Doctrine 2.0, which I was really happy with when Trump was first sworn in, and go that route. We can get Europe more on board so we can save some money there. There are a lot of ways to do it. We don't have to stop fighting after BBB and say that's the end all and be all. So I think it's important to do this. And if they don't deliver Trump's agenda, they will lose the midterms. Trump outperformed the Republican Party. We already have a hard enough time to get some of those voters out in the midterms. Now, if they don't get the job done, they're not coming out. So Scott Presler is absolutely correct. I don't care if you're the far left, the far right, the libertarian, the ultra-populist, the moderate, whatever. You have to vote if you're a Republican for this bill. And then let's go after the cuts after that. But you got to deliver on that too. You have to deliver on that too for your base, because that's what we want. Okay? Sometimes you got to do the campaign promises and what you did, but you got to make it work, and you also got to throw meat to your base. So I agree with that. So moving on from Mr. Presler, comment today. This I like. Secretary RFK Jr. has officially canceled Moderna's $700 million mRNA bird flu vaccine contract because it did not meet safety criteria. Well, didn't they kill enough chickens anyway in the tail end of the Biden administration? Didn't Moderna make enough money against a shot that violated Operation Warp Speed contract because it's not safe, it's not effective, and it did not stop transmission? So why would we even give a contract to a company that failed to meet those standards? You know, they don't want heads to roll. So they're not going back with COVID, it looks like. But let's not make the same mistake twice, okay? This comes just as he canceled recommending COVID vaccines for healthy children and pregnant women. That's a start. Should not be recommended for anybody, okay? Maybe a very particular case of an elderly person, for some reason, the coronavirus, COVID-19, is more dangerous, that infection, than, let's say, a typical pneumococcal pneumonia or a para-B flu or something to that effect. All right? But this is a good start. All right? So I like where RFK is going on this issue. I do want more exposure about what happened with COVID. I've seen lots of stuff coming out, especially on X, that a lot of people are doing good work on getting that information out. But this is a good start. So moving on. Now, this is an interesting tweet. I just happened to come across it, but I wanted to comment on it, and I'm not going to get into the history and everything that much of it, but I want to make a comparison to today. Okay, so Mark Lutchman, who I don't know, but was retweeted, 1.6. Only 1.6% of U.S. citizens owned slaves in 1860, when slavery was at its peak. So you can stop basing your hate for the entire white race for the 1.6%. So, what I'd like to say is, I've studied the Civil War, I've done all that, all right? I will say, just for historical context, secession, slavery, was a key part of secession. It was not, well, correlated, a key part of Civil War. How do we know? I'll just point to two examples. Lincoln said so. If I can save the Union, getting rid of slavery, great, but if I don't get rid of slavery, fine. His goal was to save the Union. Second, look at West Virginia. 1863, it broke away from the rebellious state of Commonwealth of Virginia, and it became a new state in the Union. It entered the Union in 1863 as a slave state. So there you go. So now 1.6%. And it makes sense. So I live here, and I've been studying the history here in East Tennessee and Northeast Tennessee. Now, if you don't know, Tennessee secession vote failed on the first vote. The second vote, it passed, and it was because the people of Tennessee saw federal encroachment on them. Especially where I am in Northeast Tennessee, where it's Appalachia, mountains. It's not plantations. I'm not saying slavery wasn't here, but it wasn't like, deep south with the cotton and tobacco and all the plantations along the coast and in deep south. But it wasn't, you got poor people with houses in the woods. These people are not interested, weren't interested in defending slavery. They saw it as an encroachment. Now, the reason why slavery was an issue, and this is why I'm linking it to today, oh, by the way, also with East Tennessee, actually had a very Whig tradition. You hear about the Solid South from the Civil War, leading up to the Civil War, all Democrat, all the way through up until like the 2000s, where the Republicans finally took the state legislature in Tennessee. Northeast Tennessee has a tradition going back to the Whigs, which were a key component of founding of the Republican Party. Okay, going back 1830s, 1840s. So Northeast Tennessee is a little different animal. Okay, but you got to understand that when those people, when they saw the encroachment of the federal government, they went, all right, I can't have Lincoln's raising troops. He's going against us. They weren't fighting for that 1.6% in any way, shape, or form. Who would do that? Just think logic. Oh, let me go, be like, I'm going to go fight for Bill Gates' right to fly a private plane. Okay, same thing. But think about, now here's why it jumped out at me today. It's the correlation to today. Here you have in the South an elitist gentry, in this case landed gentry, instead of today's credentialed class, ruling class, dictating through their money and influence the economic culture of the South. Now, the South has a whole benefit from that cheap labor and those exports. Yeah. Okay, and that was a battle going back and forth. But this is what happens when you concentrate so much power into, in this case, the Civil War, these landowners and these elites, okay, because they're going to be looking out for themselves, right? And then what do? You create things to justify what was clearly an immoral. Founding fathers knew the hypocrisy of this from their writings in slavery. You could see it. They wrote about it, okay? Ben Franklin was for getting rid of slavery. That's just one example. Again, I'm not focusing on the history. I'm focusing on today. So what we have, like then, you have this elite, that 1.6 back then, with this elite today, dictating our foreign policy, dictating our cultural events, dictating our governing policies and control. Okay? And that's the problem. Again, Democrats, just like today, just like then. Okay? That's who these people are. Okay? It is we the people. That is our sovereign. The individual, and then the state in this case, because the federal government is a creation of the states. And that is it. So I just wanted to point out that shows you even back then that small amount could wield power and end up indirectly causing a major war. Okay? Because like I said, it wasn't a reason for the war, it was a reason for secession. Because the North's goal was just keep the Union. Well, James Buchanan was like, whatever, before that. But anyway, I thought it was interesting. That's what triggered in my brain when I saw this tweet, and I thought I'd share it with you. Anyway, moving on. Boom. Some economic news from EJ and Tony at Heritage. Fixed investment in today's revised GDP estimate was essentially unchanged from the advance estimate. Although we're still way below the pre-pandemic growth trend, the rate of growth in Q1 surged higher. A very good sign which will likely continue. Now, if you don't know, because of Q1, I did this in my video when that came out, a month or two, whatever it was. It was down 0.2, mostly because of front-running the tariffs. So those dramatic increased imports takes away from your GDP. But one of the good numbers was investments jumped 41%. Here domestically. See, it is that investment in capital goods, in those tractors, in those factories, in those orders, and whatever, that is what spreads out, right? You get this pile of money and you push it, and that's what gets spread out through the economy. That really gets things going. And then it makes it down to if it's a car or tractor, to the dealer level, and then it improves their profits. And then tax revenues for that locality go up, and then they want to expand, and they'll invest in something, and then they'll get hire somebody else. See, it's a cascading domino effect of good things, and it all starts with this investment. And with the revision that it was not down 0.3, but now only down 0.2, and this number actually improved in that revision, which came out this morning, shows us that we are in good times on the domestic investment front, because it is that domestic investment that really fuels the real productive economy that produces good services, that yields jobs, income, a strong dollar that you want in your society. So I'm really glad about this, and this is the number I focus on. This is why I think the stock market will eventually hold with its regular volatility, maybe a correction here or there, and good numbers. So you focus that in with the tariffs, better trade deals, more reindustrialization over the next 4 years, get the spending down so that the dollar domestically buys more, which is better for the consumer, because then I can then buy more. If I'm not paying more for widget A, I can buy another widget B. Okay? And that's what really gets the economy going. So instead of just what we've seen under Obama and Biden, which is nothing more than asset transfers from the middle class to the elites. And that's what globalism yields as well. All right. Next. All right, let's go to the foreign front. Polish election. This Sunday, June 1st. All right? It's the runoff. Trzaskowski is we'll call him the globalist center-left candidate against Iraqi. This is a poll. I've seen this consistently. 51-49. So the left has it. Now, they caucus with EPP in the European Parliament, which is not as left as S&D, but they still are in that. Now, Iraqi, it's the Law and Justice Party. Now, Politico has on their poll of polls, which has more polls than the ones I've actually looked at, show it like 47, 46. So we'll see. And this poll and a couple others, obviously it's 100%. There's some undecideds out there. Who's going to come out? What does the electorate look like? So we're going to keep track on this. But this will be a big blow. We lost it in Romania. Well, leave that one alone. Talk about stolen elections. But this would be a good victory for us if we can get an Iraqi in there. Well, he's not. He does group with ECR in the European Parliament, which is okay. They're like your conservative Republicans, but I prefer PFE and ESN. They're the more populist. Iraqi has taken on a lot of those populist positions. And I believe those populists in the third group, the Mensen, who are with Mensen, they're really going to come strong for Iraqi. So the question is how much of the hard left comes out for Trzaskowski. So we'll find out on Sunday. So moving on a little bit.
Yeah, I'll give you an update.
This one. Final Portugal results. So I had followed this. This was interesting to me. But so the diaspora and the vote came in late. So the traditional conservatives, okay, again, who caucus in the European Parliament with the EPP. They won. They increased 11 seats, got to 91. The left lost 20. They got to 58. But because now Chega, see how they're with PFE. That's the National Rally, Vox, and all them. That's who I would have voted for. I lived in Portugal. They, with that, actually finished second. So almost like with Germany, where the CDU won, and then AfD came in second. But in this case, Chega actually did very well. So they are now the second strongest party in Portugal right now. And you see the seats below it are very low. It's just the three of them. They could probably run as a minority government. And Chega, they would just need a few votes from Chega to pass certain things, but they can get some sort of grand coalition if they put that together. But they would have to give up a lot to Chega. So we'll see how it is, and they're going to have to adopt some of those issues, because if your second largest party is more with you than the hard globalist left of PS, who lost the 20 seats. So, we'll see what it is. But if you add up them and then the other left parties, like 58, 9, 67, 70 something, it looks like they're going to have to, they can go the minority route and hope on Chega for certain key votes. If not, they'll have to form a coalition. But that's good. Definitely a good movement in Portugal for us.
Yeah, I'll give you an update. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
All right, so I started there with that Trump Q&A on the tarmac there. It's like, I don't know what's going on, Putin. I don't know what's going on, Putin. So I got into some discussion on X on this one, okay? So I then showed you the video of, that was Moscow, that next video, drone attack. Those were other pictures that I showed you that were additional drone attacks in Moscow area, okay? The Moscow Oblast, there. So Russia launched massive ballistic and drone attacks Monday, Tuesday of this past week. But what the press isn't telling you, and I don't know, but Trump, because of how he responded, where he said, well, maybe that explains it, because they tried to kill him in the helicopter or whatever. The week before, there were 1,400 drone attacks into Russia from Ukraine. They went after Putin's helicopter, that's reported. They were attacking a microchip factory near Moscow. They hit apartment buildings, residential areas, whatever. So Russia counterattacked. And they hit military targets. Warehouses that store NATO equipment, that make drones, etc. Now, okay, Ukraine was doing the same thing, but they were hitting almost like deliberate targets there. Well, Russia is targeting these key positions. But it's as if Trump doesn't know. He didn't know this. How do you not know this? Are the people around him not sharing that? Because they're trying to push him into Zelensky's direction, into the Europeans' globalist direction? I don't know. But he should know that. But he looked surprised to me when that reporter asked him, well, it sounded like he didn't know. So that questions me, the people. That's why they didn't want Daniel Davis around him. Daniel Davis was set to go. From what I understand, Tulsi Gabbard wanted him in there, and he was pushed out. So all these people around want to do that. It makes me think, what I think the new strategy is that now the Germans, the British, and the French, in order, the Taurus, the Storm Shadow, and the Scout missile, particularly the Taurus, which has 500-kilometer range, can hit targets in Moscow, and they're pulling off the range limits. But they can't operate, the Ukrainians, without German help, particularly on the Taurus. So that Germany is going to be directly involved with those attacks. Okay? So it's not, when you hear in the U.S. media, oh, Russia, well, what about the 1,400 drone attacks that were flying in? They hit an Orthodox church. They did go after some military targets. I'm not knocking that. And a lot of times when these drones get shot down, they land in residential areas where they're shot down. We know this. Okay? But there seems to be more of a blatant disregard for civilian by the Ukrainians than there are for the Russians. Because the Russians are hitting with precision strikes these key areas. Okay? He's not just launching it into Kiev. He's hitting warehouses and factories that are a part of the military production. Okay? If someone gets shot down, that's, like I said, that's an accident, whatever, and I don't fault it. I mean, the war shouldn't be going on, but in the context of war, you understand that. Okay? So, I just get nervous when I see Trump being, like, who's around them? We got to get better people around him on this. I think Pete Hegseth is honest. I just don't think he knows enough about the history in the area to be impactful. I trust Tulsi on this issue, the way she was right on Syria. I really hope he leads more into her, but he's got to bring in more people. Get Davis in there. Get McGregor in there. I don't know. That's my position. So anyway, if you don't know, Russia's been really putting the pressure on even more since my last video. There's reports of anywhere between 50 to 100,000 up in the north, and the Russians are moving. So I jumped over a couple of these before. But this is Sumy region. 1, 2, they've taken 3 areas. Just as all in the last 48 hours. That's north. This is not one of the 4. This is an additional oblast. This is Kharkov region up north. They've taken another major village. They're driving there, and that's just below the other prior map. Okay? And this is southern Donetsk. They're moving in southwest over there. They're just driving on all fronts. Okay? And, I'm seeing the word collapse more and more as these Ukrainian units cannot hold out, and they're stretched thin. They're not even making the incursions in Belgorod anymore. They can't. And now that Russia is moving into Sumy, Kharkov, and they're entering Dnipropetrovsk. So now you're looking at the 4 original oblasts plus 3 more. Okay? And the more this goes on that they don't agree to lean towards more of Russia's terms on this, the more territory they're going to lose. And I'm beginning to think it's just not going to happen anymore. And then Trump says the 2 weeks, we'll find out in 2 weeks. They'll make peace, but you got to meet them at least halfway in the middle. And their argument is simple. No NATO, the 4 oblasts, respect for the Russian citizens in there. That's the key elements. Okay, but they will go to the Dnieper for that natural barrier. I've been saying that for over a year in my videos. Okay, and clearly the Ukrainians. It's almost like the Europeans are pushing the Ukrainians into a position that will force a Russian trigger, to force them to go over the line that will bring the United States in directly. And that is the biggest fear of all. Russia has lots of weapons. They just got 140,000 new contract soldiers sign up in the last couple months. They're rotating out. And they're clearly leaving an army that is now experienced on the side of nearly 400 to 500,000 should there be a direct war with NATO. That is separate from the 600 to 800,000 that are on the front. Okay, but they will continue doing what they're doing. So, anyway, I just wanted to give you an update on the Ukraine war. What happened today with the judges, everything I'm finding out. So I'll be keeping an eye on that Polish election this weekend. Also, any more news on the tariffs, trade deals coming out, update on the battlefield in Ukraine, and any other news that might come down the pike, the Iran situation, everything like that. So you can follow me on my X at PatriotPlanner1, Getter at PatriotPlanner. And if you like this video, please follow, like, and share. All right, thanks, and have a great weekend, everybody. Talk to you later.